I grew up in Richmond, just on the outskirts of Ottawa. I came from a very loving family, went to a Catholic school. Always felt like in school, though, I didn't quite fit in. I had few friends that I kept close with, and that was it. So sometime in high school, I started smoking pot. I felt that there was a crew of people that I really got along with in smoking pot, and started making new friends around that kind of life. Spent a lot of time thinking about getting high. Money started going around, missing from around the house. And in grade 12, I started drinking. And I remember my first drink, and it just felt like a warm blanket. I felt comfortable, and I'd go home at school, or from school at lunchtime, and start drinking. And I'd go back to school. Alcohol, there was a lot of alcoholics in my family, all throughout my family. So alcoholism was big. I remember when I turned 19, I was drinking every day. I'd go to the beer store. I'd be drinking all day throughout work, constantly driving around, and eventually my doctor ended up yanking my license. Eventually I started doing speed pills and cocaine, and fast forward a couple years, I'm smoking crack. I stole from stores, I stole from family. I did a lot of things that went completely against my morals. I sold most of my things that were expensive. Ended up going to rehab and meetings, and managed to stay sober for about 3 or 4 months. And eventually I relapsed. I relapsed time and time again. I went to rehab again, and managed to stay sober for about 5 months this time, I think. I started doing crystal meth and started putting it in my arm, and life just kind of got out of control. I spent about a year in Brockville, and came back to Ottawa, was living on the street, and then went back to Brockville and came back to Ottawa, still living on the street, and spent a couple years homeless in the wintertime. And I got in trouble with the police, was in and out of jail, and just at one point I had enough and just couldn't keep living the way I was. So I called my parents and asked them if I could move back home, and they said yes, as long as I got sober. So it took me a couple months, but I managed to, by the grace of God, I managed to get sober. So in the first 9 months of my recovery, I just started working like crazy, and I'd work until I was exhausted. I'd go home, I'd eat dinner, and I'd wake up and do it all over again. Going to church on the weekends, and every week I go to church and I pray to God, thank you for keeping me sober for another week, and please help me to stay sober for another week. And a few months ago I started coming back to meetings, and it's been going good. And I'm about 2 weeks away from being a year clean and sober. Thank you. But this disease isn't just about me either. It's like about my family too, because it's really a family disease. And so I asked my family to write me a couple short paragraphs on how my addiction affected them. So, Dennis, will I struggle to summarize my thoughts and feelings on your journey through addiction into only one paragraph? The word helplessness keeps echoing in my head. Watching you in a downward spiral as your addiction worsened totally consumed me. Your well-being was constant in my mind, along with the thought that I needed to brace or prepare myself for bad news. This took its toll on me both personally and professionally. Dropping you off at campsites on Crown land in a snowstorm was hands down the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life. The worst feeling ever was knowing that I would do anything to keep you safe, yet realizing there wasn't a fucking thing I could do in that situation. Dennis, I love you unconditionally and I always will. As I write about the pain from my past, I must mention that one of the most joyous times in my life was watching your growth in the last 12 months. Sobriety looks good on you, son. Dad. My youngest brother, who's 16, wrote, Dennis, for a large portion of my childhood, your addiction has affected our relationship in a negative way. All the birthdays and holidays missed, or times where I wanted to talk to you, but you were too high to hold a conversation. Even when you would show up to family gatherings, you were high or crashing. It is sad that there is a time we will never get back. Dennis, I'm glad you've gotten help and are getting better. Congrats on 1 year, bro. Another brother wrote, I was always scared that Dennis would come home, also scared that he wouldn't. It's hard to describe how it feels when the hope of good news fades away. Being glad he's safe when he does come home, knowing he'll likely be gone, God knows where, in about a week. Expecting the worst when the phone rings, scared I'll run into him when I go out. Every time I'd see him, he's a different person, slowly watching my brother fade away, with nothing I could do. Dear Dennis, I loved you beyond measure. When you were born, I expected sleepless nights and a fussy baby, cold and flu season. Never did I expect the sleepless nights when you were an active addict. Homeless and the total desperation I felt. I was always terrified of the worst news possible. Of course, it affected my mental and physical well-being. It affected my ability to be present for your brothers, who also needed Mom. Shock can describe so many moments, like being forced to leave you in snowstorms or finding you asleep in your tent. What about the baby I used to tuck into his crib ever so tenderly? I was so desperate and angry with God. I would try to bargain, plead, beg, and yell at God. And then I noticed something. You never seemed to lose faith. I still find it mind-blowing, yet so inspiring. My new world is gratitude, especially for every day of your sobriety. Thank you for loving my son as he deserves to love himself. Keep going, my sweet boy. I love you. Always, Mom.